Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your patience today. I know today was a very long city council meeting. I do want to acknowledge Chairman Irvin. Thank you for joining us today. We also have Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa with us today, who's been a real champion for working people as a member of City Council for the last 10 years. Commissioners Boatwright and Castaneda are also with us. We also have our Deputy Mayor Gatewood. Corporate Counsel is with us today. Mary Richardson Laurie, Chief Operations Officer, is here with us. And of course, the fully now cemented Commissioner of BACP, Ivan Kapafali, is here. And my Chief of Staff is with us, CPZ. And Kenya Merritt, our Deputy Mayor for Business, Economic, and Neighborhood Development. So thank you all for joining us today. I do want to first of all, congratulate and thank Commissioner Rhee for a tremendous lifelong career in public service. As the leader of CDA, along with all the work that she did to help modernize our airports and the large-scale projects that she has moved forward, Commissioner Rhee has focused much of her efforts on expanding opportunities for women and minority-owned businesses for airport contracts and projects. At a time when diversity, equity, and inclusion is under constant attack, Commissioner Rhee and her legacy will always be one that we will uphold, and we really do thank Commissioner Rhee for her service. We also want to thank again and acknowledge the leadership of Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa, a decade's worth of service as Alder in the City Council. There have not always been a lot of independent progressive voices on City Council, and when he was elected 10 years ago, it certainly opened up a new chapter for the city of Chicago, where the Progressive Caucus has grown and very expansively. He spoke very candidly about Black and brown communities and working people in Chicago, and there was no voice like him before, and quite frankly, there will be a lot of work to live up to the standard that he has set for not just the 35th Ward, but for the voices that lead this city. But I do want to thank you personally, Alderman, for your dedication to the people of Chicago. And I'm very confident that everything that you've learned, you will utilize those skills in your new role leading our parks. And I do appreciate it. Again, I want to acknowledge our newest commissioner. Having the right representation that reflects the beauty of this city is paramount to growing a more inclusive economy. And Ivan Kapafali was approved today, and he's a true proven leader. He shares the same commitment as I do to make it much easier for Chicagoans to grow their businesses as well as to protect their businesses. He's been an integral voice in our Cut the Red Tape initiative to make sure that bureaucracy doesn't get in the way of development. He shares my perspective that Chicago is open for business, we're just not for sale. To that end, we are excited about the passage today of our new Workforce Solutions program. This is led by our Department of Planning and Development, and it allows the city to expand its ability to provide workforce development for our small businesses. We want the city to serve our small business community. We want to make it easier to grow your business because we know that means more jobs and more economic prosperity for those communities. The truth is we are seeing levels of development and investment that will fundamentally transform parts of our city that have been purposefully neglected for decades. We are also seeing development for communities that make up the brilliant tapestry of our city. The Jig Zebik housing development, really excited about this. It will offer a 100% affordable housing in the Irving Park community, and it will partner with a local Native American-led nonprofit to offer a shared space for Chicago's vibrant indigenous community. It was a real honor to tell the story of the love story of Chicago to our national audience. At the hearing last week, the story of Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable, a Haitian immigrant, a Black man who loved a Potawatomi woman, Kitty Hawa. And so it's only right that we do right by our indigenous communities right here at home. And this development is a positive move in that direction. We're also excited about the sale of the city land, the Garfield Ridge, to support a new art center, new housing, and a community garden. From the northwest side to the southwest side and everywhere else in between, we want to keep the development and the rebuilding of our city moving forward. Now, I also want to take a moment to acknowledge two recent acts of violence. There was an altercation on Sunday evening that led to gunshots being fired. One of these stray bullets struck a woman who was visiting our loved city with her young son. And thankfully, she is in good condition. However, she could have easily have lost her life to this senseless act of violence. In response, we are working with the Chicago Police Department to investigate this disturbing incident. We are also monitoring the incident outside of O'Hare Airport that occurred this morning, where another altercation led to a 25-year-old victim being shot twice. He is currently in stable condition, and we hope that he makes a full recovery. We also want to be clear, this altercation happened outside the airport, and all of the lower level terminals are fully operational. But with both of these incidents, what they show us is that the danger in our city, particularly around illegal guns, continues to pose a threat to the streets of Chicago. These weapons create a situation where any argument or disagreement can end in tragedy for the loved ones of the victim and, of course, for our city. We know these guns do not come from Chicago. They are brought in from neighboring states through legal and illegal routes. We need to put a stop to the flow of guns into our communities if we're serious about putting an end to these senseless acts of violence. As I said during my testimony last week in Congress, we do not need our police to dub as federal immigration enforcement, and we do not need federal agents to come into our communities and rip immigrant grandparents away from their families or disappear people for their political beliefs. But what we do need is the federal government to step up to help us stop the endless flow of guns into our city. We want to collaborate to find solutions at the state and federal level to put an end to this once and for all. And I hope that anyone who wants safer communities will join us in this call. Finally, as we work to hold those who cause harm, as we work to hold them accountable, we also must do the work on the front end to prevent violence from occurring in the first place. We know that once a kid has a gun in his hand for the first time, we are already too late. We have already failed. So we need to provide alternatives for our young people to stay busy, particularly in the summer, and of course to make money. So that's why I'm proud of the work that we've done to expand youth summer jobs for the third year in a row. Thank you to those of you in the media who came to the application launch yesterday and who are helping us get the word out. Get the word out to our young people about the One Summer Chicago application. My vision is simple. I believe that if we are, truly the loving city that we are, young people are willing to work, and they should have the opportunity to do that. And to that end, we are adding another 1,000 positions this year with the goal of reaching 29,000 summer jobs. We have increased youth summer employment by 40% since I've come into office, and we will continue to move in that direction. We need accountability, of course, but we also need opportunity. There is no silver bullet that will suddenly end 6 decades of violence overnight. Just like there's no magic cure that will make the history of abuse in law enforcement that is still costing us hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars today suddenly go away either. But if we lean into what we know works, we can continue to make progress to bring down violent crime and make our city a much safer place for everyone. And with that, I'm happy to answer your questions.
Tessa.
Hi, Mayor. The March 30th deadline that your administration was pushing for CPS to take the $175 million pension payment is just a few weeks away. Have you gotten any indication from the board on whether there's movement there, of whether they'll authorize a loan to make that payment, or is the city now preparing to dip into reserves to take that on?
Well, I'm going to turn the mic over to Chairman Irvin because I think it's important that you hear directly from city council members. Look, there are entanglements that have existed in our system for a very long time. With a fully elected representative school board coming on, there are efforts to disentangle these leanings that have been relied upon for a very long time. It's very clear that these particular employees that are hired by Chicago Public Schools, that it's important that their retirement is secure. Chairman Irvin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As the Mayor stated, again, this is an obligation for CPS employees, and they have paid this in the last 4 to 5 years, and why should there be anything different today? they will have to manage this as they go forward as being an independently elected body and being an independent body from the city of Chicago. So again, this is nothing new. This is something that they need to fulfill their obligation on, because again, leaving the city of Chicago on the hook for their employees is not necessarily fair to the taxpayers of the city of Chicago.
And, Chalk Beach, Chicago, they're reporting that the city is also making a $168.7 million advance pension payment to the MEABF. Do you plan to follow through on that advance payment, regardless of whether it ends up being CPS or the city that makes the disputed $175 million pension payment?
You referring to the city's obligation?
Yeah, the Chalk Beach, Chicago is reporting the city is going to make an advance pension payment.
That's
as
true.
Well.
It's true.
And is that something you plan to follow through with, regardless of whether, even if the city has to take on the $175 million pension payment?
We've made a commitment, and we're going to hold to our commitment. Thank you.
Hey, Mayor.
Hi.
Bridget Early, your inaugural deputy mayor for Labor, is exiting before a CTU or firefighters contract, before the raid between CTU and SEIU is resolved, the dispute over that. Do you think 2 years ago, when you created this deputy mayor position on your first day, you grasped how difficult it would be to bring the labor community to the fifth floor in a way that made all unions feel heard?
Well, I'm obviously the most pro-worker mayor in the country. From the abolishing of the sub-minimum wage, which impacted 60,000 workers, primarily black and brown women, the most substantive, largest paid time off for a major city, 10 days for workers, I believe. The impact is about 1.1 million workers. We, helped CPS settle the contract with Local 73, as well as our parks. Our park district workers in particular have the highest raise, particularly for their lowest earners, in the history of Chicago. And again, these are primarily people who live on the west and south sides of Chicago, southwest and northwest side. So in terms of difficulty, there's clear evidence that we have been able to bring labor to the fifth floor. And not to mention, Commissioner Boatwright can speak to this, $11 billion through the Planning Commission and Division of our government, $11 billion, 37,000 construction jobs, I believe. What else? It's almost 10,000 units. We've already built 4,000 affordable units. Sounds very worker-friendly, doesn't it? I think we're doing a great job. If that's what you're asking me to reflect on. Okay.
You said that your administration has spent 20 times the amount of the cost of the migrant response on investments for Black Chicagoans. Your dashboard says the city has spent $268 million on the migrant mission so far, so that totals to about $5.4 billion in investments. Is that the number you're working with, and can you be more specific on what projects you're talking about?
Sure. So again, the increase of youth employment, which has overwhelmingly supported Black children. In fact, the top 10 neighborhoods were primarily on the west and south side of Chicago. Again, 4,000 affordable homes that we have already, almost 4,000 affordable homes that we have put online, and the $1.25 billion bond investment, which is primarily focusing on the west and south sides of the city of Chicago. We've invested in community safety. Deputy Mayor Gatewood, I believe it's $100 million. A couple of years in a row. I mean, we're happy, to go through, all of the configurations of our investments. But I think the most important thing is that we responded to a mission that we inherited, and we did not ignore our vision to build a better, stronger, safer Chicago. My administration has proved positive that you can respond to right-wing extremism when they attempted to attack our city by attempting to divide us around this issue. I'm glad that you're raising the number because there are numbers that are not accurate in terms of how we responded to that mission. In fact, the 200 and some million that you reflected, Governor Abbott spent $221 million just to bus them across this country. It's about $1,800 a migrant. In fact, I think he spent about 1% of his overall budget. Now, I don't know what he is doing in spending money on Black people in the state of Texas, but I can tell you his attack against the city of Chicago did not stop us from investing in our people.
Hi, Mayor.
Hi, Heather. I'm used to you getting the last question, so I'm glad you got a chance to go a little bit earlier.
Yesterday or earlier this week, a federal jury came back and awarded two men who were incarcerated for a combined 32 years in prison, $120 million. Does the size of that verdict, which as best I can tell is the biggest in Chicago's history, make you think that the city needs to rethink its strategy for dealing with those sort of police misconduct lawsuits?
Well, thank you for that question. I mean, the first thing that I think that we should talk about is Guevara and Burge, right? I mean, these are two individuals that it's very clear and very well documented that these individuals were, responsible for some of the most egregious acts of torment and torture against black men. Our corporate counsel, we're in conversations every day about, how we can, approach decades of misconduct. Mary?
Mary Richardson, Lord Corp Counsel, thank you for the question. It is an ongoing evaluation. Obviously, with respect to that particular ruling, we have to examine the strategy going forward, which will include examining any motions that are applicable, appeals, etc. But as you can imagine, this is a decades-old problem. That particular case, point of origin was 2006, retried again in 2019, and then subsequently this year. So this is an ongoing challenge for the city. But as the mayor noted, constitutional policing is our principal focus, while we also have to inherit and examine and litigate and sometimes settle these very aged cases.
Mayor, you mentioned John Burge. There are a few remaining cases that name him directly that are pending. The case naming him is scheduled to go to trial at the end of April, involving a man who spent nearly 30 years in prison, which would put him in line for a judgment of more than $110 million if this verdict sets a precedent for that case. Should the city consider settling that case before that trial begins in just about a month?
Well, look, I'm not going to comment on ongoing litigation. As our corporate counsel has indicated, we've inherited some quite egregious, not just accusations, but what has been discovered as truth. Something that I know that Black Chicago knew decades ago. Our responsibility in this moment is to review all of these practices and figure out a pathway forward. But, part of that requires us to make sure that we have constitutional policing. Look, we can't necessarily control what happened in the past, but how we move forward is going to be critical. Our police force is far more diverse than it was back in the day. In fact, I believe we have 27% of our police force are women. There are more Latina Chicagoans who are applying for these positions. There are, still more black folks still applying for these positions. So that gives me some confidence and some hope with our superintendent leading the efforts to ensure that constitutional policing becomes the way of policing. That's what we're going to focus on, and as the corporate counsel said, we'll have to go back and review some of those practices to figure out how, we can move forward.
And good afternoon, Mr. Mayor.
Good afternoon.
In light of the two most recent shootings, Alderman, Hopkins, don't mind me. I'm just getting old.
No, it's been a long day, Craig. It's okay.
Yeah, but Alderman Hopkins is again going to try to reawaken his efforts to have the curfew set at 8 p.m. Can you talk about what your feeling is about how effective either changing it or, frankly, even the existence of the curfew can make a difference?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Look, I believe that Alderman Hopkins is sincere. All of us are in this city. It goes without saying, these shooting incidents are traumatic. They have obviously the potential for death, and we are grateful that it did not end that way, but it doesn't dismiss the type of trauma that will ensue as a result of these type of shootings. Here's what I've said repeatedly. We have to do the things that work. I get a report every single day because this is my top priority. Keeping the city of Chicago safe, that's my top priority. That's my number one priority. And, there's not a day that doesn't go by that we don't assess and evaluate what our full strategy has to entail. There are shootings that happen at 3 o'clock in the afternoon sometimes. Throughout the day, there are moments where shootings take place, and primarily because, of course, there are just too many people who have access to illegal guns, even illegal guns. Too many people, and so arguments and that could lead into maybe some hurt feelings leads into death. Just in January, I believe, the number of domestic-related shootings and homicides that we experienced just breaks my heart. There's only so much you can do about that, but what we are experiencing is that there's a great deal of tension that exists in society in general, and people are relying upon settling these disputes or arguments or hard feelings with violence. So that's why our full force of government approach is something that we're very intentional about holding on to. And, I know that there is a characterization of the city of Chicago, but we are not the most violent city in America. We're not even close. Quite frankly, there are more red states that are dealing with this issue per capita than we are. Just this year alone, 20% reduction so far. And so again, as my top priority, that's why we're investing in young people, building more homes and expanding our transportation access so people can get from point A to point B, hiring more people so that folks don't have to wait as long for a train. I mean, these are ways in which we are responding to disinvestment, because we know that the safe cities in America all have one thing in common: they invest in people. So look, I'm going to continue to have conversations with Alderman Hopkins and anyone else who's committed to ensuring that we're doing things that work. Again, as I said before, $100 million again just for violence intervention. Some of those results are starting to pay off for us, but there's a lot more work that we have to do.
Just to follow up, when or should there be a public discussion, maybe in the city council, maybe not, on the various methods, the various things that you could do or are being proposed, so that people can hear it being hashed out? Yeah,
it's a great question, Craig. Look, you know how I feel about town halls. I'll go to them, right? But let's just, I want to make sure that this is absolutely clear. 200 more detectives, right? We know that solving crime works. 3 new helicopters. We know that having up-to-date equipment and technology helps. 40% increase in youth employment. Expanding our care program. Building more mental health clinics. What I'm saying is that we have had robust conversations for decades about having a full force of government. I've just been the first administration to actually respond to it. Now, look, if you just look at Austin alone, this is one of the tough neighborhoods in the city of Chicago. 1,672 young people receive summer jobs. In the 15th police district, we've seen a decline in violent crime in Austin. The work that we're doing with streets and sanitation, not just summer options, but giving them opportunity for permanent jobs, union jobs. I forgot to add that one, Jake. You can write that one. There'll be 100 more, I believe. It's about 100 more that we're going to do for Cole. Mm-hmm. So we had 45, was it 45 of them? 50 something. See, I got to get all these numbers right. They're so good, Jake. So 50 young people who were part of a pilot got permanent jobs, mostly black and brown, pro-worker, the most pro-worker mayor in America. And then we're adding another 100, Craig, for this next set. So this is what I mean by full force. And I'm open to having more conversations, because I can tell you, we weren't doing this before. We weren't. And we can make all those investments and still hold people accountable.
Hi, Mayor.
Is this a numbers question?
Yeah, there's some numbers.
All right.
In my first clause, actually, the Trump administration's Department of Education is reducing staff by nearly 50%, with staffers in the department's Office for Civil Rights in Chicago being laid off, included in that. What could these cuts mean for CPS, including its budget, federal funding cuts to CPS's budget, and are you concerned how that could impact the city's budget in turn?
Look, there's no mayor, I would argue, that has ever been committed to public education the way I have. Just from a pure, simple fact that I send my children to the public schools of Chicago. No mayor's ever done that. No mayor's ever taught in our public schools before. And I've quoted W.E.B. Du Bois over and over again. It's a Negro idea, end quote. And any attack against public education is an attack against not only the decency and the evolution of our democracy, it's an attack against black liberation. These are one of the 5 demands that descendants of slaves had. And when you think about how I even came into power, it was fighting the very policies that Donald Trump was putting forward when we had administrations closing schools and privatizing and laying off black and brown women. We've lost half of our black teaching force because of the very policies in which the Trump administration has moved forward. At that time, they were being moved by Democrats. There's something that people have in common, particularly those that have disdain for the liberation of particularly marginalized people, is that the government has a responsibility to serve as the better good of people and humanity. And so the impact that it could have on special education, transportation within our public school system, bilingual education, our sports and extracurricular activities. That's why the almost $300 million TIF surplus, it's the largest surplus in the history of Chicago. That's how committed I am to public education. Remember, other administrations said that we couldn't do that. Guess what? When I got here, I pulled the lever. As much as available through this process, I'm going to make sure that our children, our families get access to it. No matter where you live, you deserve a high quality public education. And we're going to continue to organize and fight, not just here in Chicago for a good contract, but from around the country to ensure that public education at the expense of the state, which after all is a Negro idea, that we fulfill the promise and the hopes of my ancestors.
A resolution was sent to Rules today that calls for the release of Palestinian activist Mahmoud Khalil, who led protests at Columbia University, as I'm sure you know, who's now being detained and facing deportation. Do you support that resolution, and are you concerned that demonstrators on Chicago campuses could be targeted by the Trump administration?
Well, they are obviously already being targeted. I fully support the First Amendment. You know, the constitutional right that people have, we have to uphold in this country if we're going to make sure that our democracy continues to evolve. And the fact that people are being detained for their political views, that is beyond dangerous and reprehensible. And so I fully support the First Amendment, and people should not be held for their political views, right? That is not the hallmark of our democracy. The First Amendment is fundamental to us making sure that our humanity is always intact.
Good afternoon, Mayor.
Good afternoon.
Given that the duties of the Department of Education are mostly around Title I funding and college, what do you think are the aspects of CPS that are most vulnerable to cuts at the Department of Ed?
Look, the vulnerability is in the mere fact that we have an administration that does not believe in public education. What it does is it sets a precedent for states to behave irresponsibly. So it's not just simply about the dollars, titles that matriculate through states as well as to local bodies. It's about the mindset. It's the temerity of this administration to undermine something that should be a guaranteed right.
Okay, changing lanes a bit. Last time we talked, you said that the mayor's office does not have to allow anyone in the gift room, despite what the Board of Ethics said. But then earlier this week, some journalists were allowed in. Why the change of heart?
So look, this space has always been public. And I could be mistaken. I don't ever remember saying that we don't have to allow you, right? I don't know if I've ever said that. But just for the record, this closet has been around for 40 years, And so what we have done, we have gone 2-3 extra steps, because there's nothing surreptitious about this closet. Folks saw it, as I said, T-shirts and mugs. I'm just going to be honest. There are people that are being harmed in the streets of Chicago. I'll just be honest with you. It's embarrassing that this is even a conversation. It is. It is. This room has been, hold on a second, okay? Hold on. It has always been made for public. It has been around for 40 years. For 40 years. For 40 years, this closet has existed. And so now what we have done, we have taken 2 additional steps. We have now made it available for people to view it online. You all can have a field day in there, as far as I'm concerned. I've never seen the closet. I'm not interested in going and seeing what's in there. What I'm interested is building a better, stronger, much safer Chicago. If people want to have conversations about coffee mugs and T-shirts, have at it. As far as my administration is concerned, I'm going to make sure that we build a more inclusive economy so that Black, brown, white, Asian, working people in this city can actually live in the city, afford to live in the city, and feel safe in the city.
Over here. Alderman Mike Rodriguez has an ordinance impacting rideshare drivers, setting standards of pay, some benefits, allowing them to kind of appeal if they got kicked off the apps, appeal that process. Do you support that ordinance as it's written?
I haven't had a chance to go into the full substance of this, and we're going to continue to have conversations.
So this is an ordinance that was introduced May 2023. Your office has been at the negotiating table. As you said, you're a pro-worker mayor. Why are you not familiar with that? Why are you not putting the weight of your office behind the ordinance?
Well, there are a plethora of things that we have done to demonstrate that we are pro-worker, and we will continue to show up on behalf of the working people in this city. And I'm grateful that we have champions who believe in what I believe in, and we'll continue to have the conversations necessary as we move forward.
Hi, Mayor. Wanted to ask you about the USDA halting more than $1 billion in funding for food banks and for schools. What kind of impact that has on Chicago?
Yeah, as I've said before, look, it's no secret, that this administration has an incredible disdain for working people in our country, and he has spent more time figuring out how to release January 6ers. Right? I mean, these individuals who obviously, committed, violent acts against our country and the sensibility of our democracy. One of the things that we have done repeatedly in my administration is we've made sure that we are providing as many resources as we possibly can to working people, whether it's the $300 million TIF surplus for our schools, the $1.25 billion investment for economic development and housing, the $830 million that we've committed to infrastructure. As another example as being a pro-worker mayor in a pro-worker city, no layoffs and cuts to services. Look, these threats are real, right? We secured $426 million, particularly for the west side of Chicago. Alderman Irvin has advocated very hard, and Alderwoman Mitz and Taliaferro to work with our congressional delegation to respond to individuals who experienced flooding back in 2023. So our efforts to support working people in the city of Chicago has been very audacious and intentional, even before this administration has assumed power. So obviously, we're very much concerned about the impact that this is going to have on a number of people who use food banks as a way to make ends meet. We're very concerned, obviously, about the impact that this is going to have on all of our public assets, but it's not going to stop us from making our investments and working with our congressional delegation to advocate to make sure that the billions of dollars that the city of Chicago sends to the federal government, that we receive a return on our investment.
And I guess to sort of expand beyond that, do you have numbers about how many federal workers have been laid off in the city of Chicago?
I don't have that specific number. We can make sure we get back to you with that. But what I will say is, again, this has been a practice of conservative ideology in this country, where austere budgets and cuts to important public sector institutions have historically been the prevailing way in which budgets have been balanced. We're working to turn the corner here in Chicago.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor.
Good evening.
When we last talked about reparations, at the time it was the first quarter, and we had talked about none of that money being spent at the time. You said that you were getting a committee together, or a commission together, by the end of the first quarter.
Right.
Well, it's the end of the first quarter.
Almost
so
there.
What's up with the bread, Fred?
That's a nice quote from the Good Times era. So working with our Chief Equity Officer, Chief Carla Coupe, as well as the chair of the Black Caucus, Stephanie Coleman, we are really close to solidifying the configuration of how these committees will be staffed, as well as individuals to be identified. What's most important for me is getting this process right. We have to have the right people at the table, and what that means is there has to be a diverse group of individuals that come from multiple sectors to be able to provide direction around what reparations could look like in the city of Chicago.
We noticed today that there is a pending resolution to recognize Maple Park subdivision as the oldest black middle-class Newtown subdivision in Chicago. In fact, a lot of people don't know that it falls into one of the wealthiest zip codes in the city. And the people of Maple Park are wondering how you're investing in that part of the South Side when you've got potholes up and down 117th Street near the Cooper Park, and that the Cooper Park Fieldhouse.
Question, please. Thank you.
Well, no, there's another part of the question. And that you have a field house, a 1966 field house, that is in the same size, which is the size of this room here, as it was when it opened in 1966. So we want to know where the investment is.
Well, thank you for that question. As I mentioned earlier, Mark, and that's an important question, particularly around our infrastructure, $830 million for these infrastructure needs that we have, whether it's our streets, whether it's the bridges, the viaducts, our lighting. We have to make those investments, and I'm grateful that there are a number of city council members who understand the value of those investments. And the city of Chicago deserves these type of investments, particularly at a time when the federal government is working to apprehend as much as they possibly can from taxpayers in the city of Chicago.
Good afternoon, Mayor.
Good afternoon.
You've committed to transparency with the 35th Ward Aldermanic selection process and the work of the Civic Committee. What will that transparency look like in practice for observers of that process?
Well, first of all, this is a very local matter. The 35th Ward has had incredible representation for the last 10 years. There's been a process that the 35th Ward has gone through to put forth individuals who are seeking this position. I have not spoken with any particular person who is interested in filling the vacancy of Alderman Ramirez Rosa, but once individuals brought to my attention, I will have a full, robust outlook on who best matches the values of the 35th Ward and who believe in building a better, stronger, safer Chicago and a more inclusive economy.
And will you honor the recommendation of that Civic Committee, or will it still be up to you depending on
Well,
who they...
look, I mean, there's no secret that mayors before me have that power. That power doesn't change because I'm here, right? But what I'm saying is that the 35th Ward has been represented for the last decade by a true champion for working people. The 35th Ward deserves to have someone who reflects their values.
Mayor Johnson, summer in Chicago, sadly, is considered violent black teenager season in Chicago by a lot of Chicagoans. It kicked off early on Sunday when about 100 or so violent black teens descended on downtown, specifically the Streeterville neighborhood, menacing residents, culminating in the shooting of a... No, I'm sorry, you didn't interrupt anyone else. This is a very important question that a lot of people in Chicago are very concerned about. That culminated in the shooting of a tourist pushing a baby carriage down Illinois Street. I've spoken with a number of the Streeterville residents. They say that they're not only worried about the violent black teenagers, what really concerns them is that they feel that the mayor doesn't get it. You say that you're going to have summer jobs. You're going to put another $100 million into these jobs. They didn't work last summer. And the question is simply this. At that press conference yesterday, you said that you wanted a second term. You needed these young black people in order to get reelected. is this spending the hundreds of millions of dollars simply an attempt to buy votes?
No.
There was Mayor Johnson. My follow-up question. Everyone got a follow-up question. Lori Lightfoot also told me that crime was down. Lori Lightfoot also tried to buy votes by using other people's money. Do you think that you will get reelected using Lori Lightfoot's playbook?
I'm focused on this first term.
Mike, please.
Hi, Mayor.
Hi.
Okay, I'm just going to go. Do you agree with the CCPSA push to issue a vote of no confidence in Andrea Kirsten before she stepped down? And do you think the next leader of COPA needs to demonstrate a different vision or leadership style as the panelists talked
Look,
about?
this is an important body of government, right? Because accountability is something that I know where we all embrace, right? We've already expressed earlier about the troubled past of our police department and moving with some expediency around how we fulfill the consent decree to further demonstrate our commitment to constitutional policing. That's what's paramount. As far as, any particular bodies vote around any particular person, I don't discuss personal matters or even discuss publicly about how someone feels about another leader or even elected official. What I'm most interested in is ensuring that we have a police force that reflects the values of our city, and that we continue to build trust within our communities, and that in the event that trust is broken, that there is a structure and a system in place that, one, holds individuals accountable, but more importantly, reduces or eliminates the likelihood of any of that type of breakdown from occurring again.
And on the topic of labor again, given that the CTU and Local 2 contracts have yet to be settled, do you regret at all the FOP contract you secured in your first year with those 20% raises, thereby, having a de facto floor for all the unions that have come after?
Making sure that we're showing up for working people, I will never regret. I will never regret. Look, I come from working people. I can tell you there were times where I wish my father had better political leadership that valued public employees. There's been an attack on public employees for a very long time, and I'm confident that we're going to continue to work through these demands, but I'm very proud of the fact that Local 73, our parks workers, our workers in our schools, our SECA workers, these individuals receive raises, higher wages than they've ever experienced before. Being pro-worker is being pro-business. Right? Being pro-worker continues to make sure that the balance of our communities are ultimately sustained. That's important, right? There are two individuals here with me today that represent many working people in this city. And, the last I heard, I don't ever remember a police officer coming up to me and saying, Mayor Johnson, that raise, you really should have thought about that before you did that. Not one police officer has ever come up to me and said, you know what, you did too much for us. And for the record, not one park district worker has ever come up to me and say, you know what, raising the wages for the lowest wage workers within our bargaining unit, you really should have thought about that. Look, taking a bold stand and leading the way in this moment to be the most pro-worker city in America, that's something that Chicago takes a lot of pride in, and we're grateful for our first responders because the raises that they did get, they earned them.
Thank you for taking the question, Mayor.
Of course, you're welcome.
Wanted to ask you if you're considering surplusing any additional TIF dollars for CPS. The CEO has said that they requested $484 million but received $300 million. Are you thinking about maybe surplusing more for their MEABF payment?
It's the largest surplus in the history of Chicago. The largest surplus in the history of Chicago. The last I checked, I think he served under other mayors. I don't ever remember him advocating in that way. I don't ever remember. In fact, it's not even whether or not I remembered. He didn't. You don't have to call for a public school teacher, a pro-worker mayor, to release the largest surplus in the history of Chicago. We did it, and I'm grateful that the city council supported that effort.
But what happens if the CPS and school board, they don't send that payment, the $175 million reimbursement to the city? By March 30th or March 31st, the deadline. What happens?
I want to believe that the CEO did not come before the city council and lie to them. I want to believe that.
But logistically, I hate to press this, but logistically,
You don't have to
what
hate. I'm
happened?
just saying that he gave the city council his word.
Sure, I know, Mayor, but
So
what
you
will
want
happen
me
if you
to?
don't
So
get
you
it?
want me to? You want me to answer that if the CEO lied to the city council, what's the contingency plan around someone being dishonest? Call on the name of Jesus.
Mayor, I know you're sort of addressing his, but let me follow up and just double down on this question. We're hearing from some alders that the city's budget will become unbalanced if you don't get this $175 million. You got to do something. And if from the public hearings, CPS decides to put their $139 million towards the contracts, Chicago's $175 million in the hole. I mean, something's got to happen. So what do? I mean, you go to the school board and ask them to take out a loan or something? I think that's illegal. But I mean, you've got to do something to make up the hole.
Well, look, I'm not going to, go down a hallway or into a closet and discussing hypotheticals. He made a promise to city council. And so it's incumbent upon him to keep to his word.
If he doesn't, what if he doesn't? I mean, you've got a couple of weeks, and there is a significant dollar figure here that's going to have to be dealt with your budget if they don't come through with the money.
Yeah, so again, the CEO stood in front of members of the city council and made a commitment to do what the school board ultimately has to prepare to do at a more significant scale. As we work to disentangle the relationship between city government and Chicago Public Schools, the CEO's responsibility to make sure that the retirement is secure for the workers of the Chicago Public Schools, that is their responsibility, and that's going to continue to be a growth, because eventually in a couple of years there will be full disentanglement. So it's a good muscle to build.
Forgive me, Mayor, but I mean, that doesn't answer the question of what the city will do if the CEO does not come through with that money. I mean, maybe he promised it, but that doesn't change the situation if they don't come through and pay it.
Well, look, as I've said repeatedly, and our chairman of the budget committee has made it very clear that you're asking us what we're going to do if someone goes back on their word. That's what your question is. And what we're saying is that he gave his word. And so if you're asking me to guess if someone is going to go back on their word, I understand you feel like that's not answering the questions. But what I'm simply saying is you're asking me to answer a question about whether or not someone is telling the truth.
Do you have contingency plans? I guess that's kind of...
Well, I mean, look, there's no secret that there are challenges that budgets are experiencing all over the country. What's most important in this moment is our budget chair, along with our education chair, have spoken directly to the CEO, and the CEO gave this body his word that he was going to do his job. And so we fully expect the CEO to hold to his word, especially to the people that he made the promise to. Thank you all very much.